Dearest heartwarming millionaire family, today we bring you a sweet, emotional, and utterly swoon-worthy love story that might just take your breath away. Let's dive in. The crystal chandeliers sparkled in the grand ballroom of the Grand Regency Hotel in Dallas, casting glittering reflections across the gold-plated walls and the polished marble floors. The gentle strains of violins blended with the hum of elegant conversation, as hundreds of impeccably dressed guests gathered to witness what was meant to be a magical union between Sarah Mitchell and Thomas Hartwell. In the bridal suite, 28-year-old Sarah stood in front of a full-length mirror, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her delicate white veil. Her satin silk gown clung perfectly to her frame, radiating the poised elegance of a gifted interior designer, one who had spent months obsessing over every detail of this day. She allowed herself a small, nervous smile, trying to ignore the shadow of unease that had lingered all week. "You look absolutely stunning," whispered Emma, her best friend and maid of honor, eyes glistening with emotion. But there was something behind Emma's smile, something tight, almost forced, as if she were keeping something hidden. Sarah dismissed it, chalking it up to pre-wedding jitters. With a deep breath, she stepped out of the suite, ready to embrace whatever came next. The wedding hall was a vision of white roses and candlelight, glowing softly like a dream. Guests rose to their feet, turning towards Sarah as she made her way down the red carpet aisle. At the far end stood Thomas Hartwell, her fiancé. He looked every bit the part of a groom in his sharp black suit, the son of a powerful politician, a man she had loved for 2 years. Yet sometimes she wondered, was their love truly real or simply perfect on paper? Today, she chose to believe in love. But as Sarah approached, the smile on Thomas's face began to fade. He stepped forward and lifted a hand, signaling the orchestra to stop. The violins ceased mid-note. A heavy silence fell over the room. Sarah's heart slammed against her chest. "Thomas?" she whispered, her voice unsteady. "Sarah," he said coldly, his tone devoid of warmth. "I'm sorry, I can't do this." A collective gasp echoed through the hall. Sarah stood frozen, her mind blank. "I don't want to get married," he continued, not meeting her eyes. "Not to you. I've changed my mind." Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Sarah stranded beneath the piercing gaze of hundreds, staring, whispering, judging. The murmurs swelled into noise. Camera flashes burst around her like gunfire, cutting through her like knives. "Runaway bride," someone shouted. Phones flew up. Screens captured the most humiliating moment of her life. Emma rushed to her side, trying to shield her from the chaos, but Sarah pushed her away. "Don't," she said firmly, her voice shaking. "I don't need pity." She turned, her gown trailing like a ghost behind her. She didn't run. She didn't cry. Not yet. With her head held high, she walked straight through the emergency exit at the edge of the hall, leaving behind the noise and the blinding lights. Outside, the Dallas air was thick and stifling, but she kept walking. She climbed into a waiting taxi, not even caring that her wedding dress was caught in the door. "Get me out of here," she told the driver, voice barely audible. "Anywhere." Within hours, the scandal exploded across the media. Politician's son abandons bride at the altar. The headlines were ruthless. Some painted Sarah as a tragic victim. Others branded her a failed gold digger. Friends she thought she could trust turned their backs, with some even publicly criticizing her online. Clients canceled contracts, unwilling to be associated with scandal. The interior design career she had spent years building collapsed overnight. She couldn't remain in Dallas another minute. With a small suitcase hastily packed and still dressed in her wedding gown, Sarah boarded a midnight train out of the city. She had no plan, no destination, only a desperate desire to find a place where no one knew her name, where no one would look at her with pity in their eyes. The train carried her deep into Wyoming, a rugged, untamed land of sweeping mountains and endless sky, as if the very earth itself promised a second chance. The train station was tiny and forgotten by time, just a crooked tin roof, a rusting sign, and a few weathered wooden benches. It was well past midnight, not a soul in sight. Sarah sat down, her wedding gown now wrinkled and dirt-streaked, her heels tossed beside her. She looked up. The stars above sparkled in the ink-black sky, as if they were whispering comfort only she could hear. But their distant beauty couldn't ease the weight in her chest. She hugged her arms around herself, her voice barely a whisper. What did I do wrong? She had given Thomas her heart, built a future around the life they were supposed to share. She had dreamed of a warm home, laughter echoing through sunlit rooms, design projects she'd pour herself into. And now, all of it had burned to ash. Her thoughts wandered to her mother, the endless pressure to marry someone right, someone who checked the boxes. A flicker of anger rose within her. No, she murmured to the night, this won't define me. Beneath the starlight, Sarah rose to her feet and wiped away her tears. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for certain. There was no going back. Dallas, Thomas, the dreams they had built together, they had to stay behind. She tightened her grip on the suitcase and stepped off the station platform. Wyoming, wild and unfamiliar, held no promises, but it held possibility. And that was enough. In that quiet moment, Sarah Mitchell, the abandoned bride, took the first step toward becoming someone stronger, braver than she'd ever known herself to be. Then came the sound of an engine. A sleek black SUV pulled up to the front of the station, its headlights piercing the darkness and making her squint. The engine hummed, then cut out. A door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, his movements confident but composed. Under the dim glow of the station's single flickering lamp, she could make out sharp features, angular jawline, high cheekbones, and a pair of deep brown eyes that seemed to see straight through her. Sarah's grip on the suitcase tightened. Every instinct went on alert. "You're Sarah Mitchell, aren't you?" he asked, his voice low, clear, and unsettlingly certain. She stiffened. How could he know her name in a place like this? "I'm Jack Morrison," he said quickly before she could respond. "I saw you on the news tonight. The bride from Dallas. Quite the scene." Her stomach dropped. Heat rushed to her cheeks. The shame returned like a blade twisting in her chest. "What do you want?" she snapped, trying to keep her voice steady. The last thing she needed was another stranger looking for a story, or worse, a spectacle. Jack stepped closer. His eyes didn't waver. "I'm not here to gawk," he said. He pulled a phone from his coat pocket, tapped the screen, and held it up. A headline blazed across the top. "Abandoned bride spark scandal at high-profile Dallas wedding." "You're running," he said evenly. "I can help, but I need something in return." Sarah stood abruptly, her wedding dress swaying, her hair wild from the train ride and the wind. "I don't want your pity," she said, her voice sharp. "If you're here to gloat, save us both the time." But Jack didn't flinch. His expression remained unreadable, serious but not unkind. "I don't pity you," he replied. "This isn't charity. I need a wife, on paper only, 6 months. It's for a legal situation involving my family's land. In exchange, I'll give you a place to live, somewhere quiet, where no one knows your name or your past." Sarah blinked, stunned by the bluntness of it. His words hit like a slap, not because they were cruel, but because they were so coldly precise. She studied his face, searching for a trace of mockery, a hint of manipulation, but there was nothing, only calm, calculated honesty. "You're talking about a fake marriage?" Sarah asked, her voice low, part skeptical, part intrigued. "Exactly," Jack replied without hesitation. "A straightforward contract. You'll live on my ranch in Wyoming and act as my legal wife. I'll provide financial support, housing, and complete privacy. After 6 months, we go our separate ways. No strings, no emotions." Sarah let out a dry, bitter laugh that echoed through the still Wyoming night. "You think I'm desperate enough to agree to be someone's pretend wife, just hours after being abandoned at the altar?" Jack tilted his head slightly, a flicker of amusement glinting in his dark eyes. "I think you're smart enough to recognize an opportunity when it's staring you in the face. You have nowhere to go, Sarah. Dallas isn't your home anymore. I'm offering you a way forward." She wanted to argue, to tell him exactly where he could take his offer, but his words landed like a blow to the chest. They were harsh, yes, but painfully true. She had nothing left back in Dallas, no friends, no job, no dignity, and maybe, just maybe, a strange, unfamiliar place like Wyoming was exactly where she needed to be to rebuild. After a pause, Sarah took a steadying breath and met his gaze head-on. "If I agree, I want to see the contract, and I want to add my own terms." Jack gave a faint, approving smile, the first hint of expression beyond his stoic exterior. "You're tougher than I expected." "Good. I prefer working with people who know what they want." He opened the SUV's rear door and gestured for her to get in. "Come on, we'll go over the details at my office." He made a call to his lawyer as they drove into a nearby town. There, in a small but modern building, tucked between pine trees, Jack maintained a temporary office. Inside, warm light from a desk lamp spilled across walls lined with books and a long oak table. A legal document already lay waiting at its center. Sarah sat down, her dress dusty and her eyes sharp with determination. Jack's lawyer soon arrived and handed her the contract. She pored over every line, every clause, reading with the focus of someone used to scrutinizing blueprints. The agreement was clear. For 6 months, Sarah would act as Jack Morrison's wife. She would attend public events when necessary, reside on his ranch, and keep out of his personal affairs. In return, she'd receive a generous financial settlement at the end of the term, enough to start a new life, and a safe place to live, free from media scrutiny. But it was the final clause that made her pause. No emotional involvement between parties. "This needs to change," she said, tapping her finger firmly on the page. "I want a clause added. I can use my time at the ranch however I see fit, as long as it doesn't interfere with my role in this arrangement. I'm not a puppet." Jack raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by her assertiveness. "You want freedom? Fine, but understand this. My ranch has rules. You'll be expected to follow them." "I will," Sarah replied coolly, locking eyes with him. "But I'm not your employee. I'm a partner in this deal." There was a pause. Then Jack nodded once. "All right, I'll add the clause." He sat down at his laptop, made the changes, and printed out a fresh copy. Sliding it across the table, he handed her a pen. "Sign it, Sarah Mitchell. From this moment on, you're my wife. On paper." Sarah picked up the pen, her hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the gravity of the choice. Each stroke of her signature felt like a declaration. She would no longer be defined by betrayal or shame. She was stepping into something unknown, something bold. When she finished, Jack extended his hand. "Welcome to Wyoming, Mrs. Morrison." She shook it, feeling the strength in his grip and the cool control behind it. But somewhere, in his eyes, she caught a flicker of curiosity, maybe something deeper. He was hiding it well, whatever it was. Sarah couldn't tell what this arrangement would bring, but one thing was clear. This was her first step toward reclaiming her life. Jack Morrison's SUV glided along the winding red dirt roads that led deep into the Wyoming mountains. The early morning light cast golden beams across vast open fields, where the peaks shimmered faintly through a veil of mist. In the back seat, Sarah had finally changed out of her wedding dress. Now she wore a simple sweater and jeans from her suitcase. Still, she felt out of place, like she was stepping into a world that wasn't hers. Not yet, anyway. But she was here now, and the rest of her story was waiting. The marriage contract Sarah had signed just hours earlier still lingered in her mind like a watermark, an ever-present reminder that she wasn't truly Mrs. Morrison, only a component in a well-organized transaction. The SUV slowed, then came to a halt in front of tall, wrought iron gates. As they opened with a soft mechanical hum, a vast estate unfolded before her eyes. The ranch was sprawling, modern, almost too modern for its rugged surroundings. The main house stood like a sculpture of wood and glass, its clean architectural lines strikingly contemporary. It looked less like a home and more like an award-winning design from an architecture magazine. Surrounding the house were sleek stables, a pristine greenhouse, and meticulously maintained fields. Everything was beautiful, perfect, but strangely lifeless. Sarah stepped out of the vehicle and inhaled the crisp mountain air, hoping it would clear the unease settling deep in her chest. Jack led the way inside, his strides long and purposeful, his demeanor businesslike. "Maria will show you to your room," he said, tone flat, like reading from a script. "You can move freely throughout the house. Just stay out of my office. Dinner is at 7. Be on time." No smile, no welcome. Sarah gave a quiet nod, but irritation sparked beneath her calm surface. She wasn't his employee. She was part of a deal, but still a person. Just then, a petite woman emerged from the hallway. Her salt and pepper hair was neatly tied back, and her warm eyes crinkled as she smiled. "I'm Maria," she said with genuine warmth. "Welcome to Morrison Ranch, Miss Sarah. Don't let Mr. Jack scare you. He's not exactly great with people." The contrast in tone was startling, and Sarah couldn't help but smile in return. Maria led her upstairs to a spacious guest room. Large windows overlooked the distant mountains, the view both stunning and surreal. The furnishings were simple: a solid wooden bed, a wardrobe, a modest writing desk, but everything was tidy and thoughtfully arranged. "This will be your room," Maria said gently, placing a comforting hand on Sarah's shoulder. "If you need anything, I'm always in the kitchen downstairs." Sarah nodded, grateful for the small gesture. In Maria, she sensed an unexpected ally. Once alone, Sarah began unpacking the few clothes she had. She paused by the window, her gaze drifting out over the land that was now her temporary refuge. The house, with all its gleaming glass and modern symmetry, reflected the sunlight, but none of it felt warm. As an interior designer, she instinctively read spaces like stories, and this one told of emptiness. It had potential, yes. The architecture was impeccable, but it lacked character. It lacked soul. That thought sparked something inside her, a tiny flicker, like the first match struck in the dark. Maybe she couldn't change her situation overnight, but maybe, just maybe, she could bring a little warmth back into the world around her. If not for Jack, then for herself. That afternoon, Sarah ventured outside to explore the ranch. She wandered through a small garden, where wildflowers grew in unruly clusters, beautiful but undisciplined. She peeked into the greenhouse, lush and cared for, but functional, not imaginative. Then she made her way to the stables, nearly empty but impeccably clean. Inside, a tall, sun-bronzed man with kind eyes greeted her. "I'm Carlos," he said, shaking her hand with a firm but friendly grip. "Security around here. You're the first person Jack's brought here in years. Welcome, Senora Morrison." He winked. Sarah gave him a faint smile in return, still getting used to the title that felt both strange and surreal. As they walked, Carlos shared stories about the ranch, how Jack had transformed it from neglected land into a valuable, self-sustaining estate, all while keeping it almost completely shut off from the outside world. "He values his privacy," Carlos said, voice dropping a notch. "But sometimes, I think he's lonelier than he lets on." Sarah didn't reply, but the words stayed with her. Jack Morrison, cold, controlled, sharp-eyed and unreadable. What was buried beneath that fortress of composure? At exactly 7 o'clock, Sarah entered the large dining room. The long wooden table was set simply, but with elegance. Candles flickered in tall holders, casting a soft glow across polished glassware and white china. It looked like a table meant for guests, but it felt like no one had truly been welcomed here in a long, long time. Jack was already seated at the head of the table, eyes locked on a file, flipping through its pages without even glancing up as she entered. Maria appeared moments later, setting down a steaming platter of roast beef and potatoes. She offered Sarah a warm smile before slipping quietly back into the kitchen. Sarah took her seat, feeling more like she was walking into a board meeting than sitting down for a family dinner. "Are you settled in?" Jack asked flatly, his gaze still on the document in front of him. "I am," Sarah replied evenly. "But I do have a few questions. What exactly am I supposed to be doing here? I mean, besides playing your wife?" Jack finally looked up. His gaze was sharp, analytical, like he was trying to size her up. "Do whatever you like, as long as you don't interfere with me," he said. "The contract's clear. Show up when I need you. Stay quiet when I don't. Simple." Sarah clenched her fork. The way he dismissed her, treated her like a piece of rented furniture, it was starting to crawl under her skin. "I'm not your employee, Jack. I agreed to be a partner in this arrangement, not a puppet. If I'm going to be here, I want a purpose." One of his eyebrows arched. A flicker of something, surprise maybe, crossed his face before vanishing. "Purpose?" he echoed, a hint of sarcasm in his tone. "What do you want? Redecorate my house? Open a boutique in the mountains?" "Maybe both," Sarah said without blinking. "This place is beautiful, but it's not a home. It feels like a showroom. I could help change that." Jack slowly set the file aside, his full attention shifting to her for the first time. "You think you can do something with a house that doesn't even belong to you?" "I'm an interior designer," Sarah said firmly. "I know how to make a space feel lived in, alive. If you'll allow it, I'd like to start with the kitchen. It needs warmth." For a long moment, Jack studied her. She couldn't tell if he was weighing a challenge or an offer. Finally, he gave a small nod. "Do what you want. Just don't expect me to be involved." Sarah allowed herself the faintest smile. For the first time since stepping into this arrangement, she felt a sliver of control. "I don't need you to be," she said. "Just don't get in my way." After dinner, Maria pulled Sarah aside, her eyes twinkling. "You did well, dear," she whispered. "Jack's not used to being challenged. But I saw the way he looked at you. Something's different. He doesn't open up easily, but keep being yourself. He needs that more than he knows." Sarah nodded, a spark of curiosity igniting in her chest. Who was Jack Morrison, really? beneath all that coldness and control. Why would a man like him need a fake marriage in the first place? Later that night, in her room, Sarah stood by the window. As moonlight spilled across the mountains, casting silver shadows across the land. A quiet determination settled in her chest. She wasn't just here to endure 6 months. She was going to leave her mark. The next morning, golden sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows of the Morrison Ranch kitchen. It painted a soft glow across a room that still felt cold. The stainless steel cabinets gleamed. The black granite countertops were pristine. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. Like a gallery. Beautiful, but hollow. Sarah Mitchell stood in the center of it all, a warm mug of coffee cradled in her hands. Her eyes scanned every surface, every untouched corner. 3 days here had been enough to make a decision. She wasn't going to be a ghost in this house. She wasn't going to play the silent wife Jack thought he'd hired. She was Sarah Mitchell, a designer, a creator, and this place was her canvas. Setting her mug down, she opened her suitcase and pulled out a worn sketchbook, filled with ideas and color swatches. She flipped to a blank page and started scribbling notes, soft beige curtains to filter the harsh light, a hand-woven rug for texture and warmth, a few potted herbs by the window, life where there was none. This kitchen, she thought, should be the heart of the home, not just a place to cook, a place to live. She thought back to her days in Dallas, where she transformed cramped, uninspiring apartments into warm, inviting spaces for clients. If she could do it for them, she could certainly do it here, for herself, and maybe even for this ranch. Maria, the gentle-hearted housekeeper, stepped into the kitchen, carrying a basket of fresh vegetables from the garden. "You're up early, Miss Sarah," she said with a warm smile that lit up the room. "Need any help?" Sarah returned the smile and gestured toward her open sketchbook. "I want to bring some warmth into this kitchen, Maria. It feels cold, clinical. I think we can turn it into a space where people actually want to gather. What do you think?" Maria tilted her head, surveyed the room, and nodded eagerly. "I agree. Mr. Jack never pays attention to things like this. As long as it's clean and functional, that's enough for him. But I know he'd like it, even if he'll never say it out loud." She gave a playful wink, and Sarah laughed, feeling a quiet bond forming between them. The two spent the entire day working together. Sarah rearranged the open shelves, placing jars of herbs and spices in plain view to add a lived-in charm. She discovered some old cotton fabric in storage and hand-stitched makeshift curtains to soften the morning light. A small wooden table was pulled into the center of the room, draped with a cream-colored cloth and topped with a vase of wildflowers from the garden. Sarah even borrowed a few tools from Carlos, the ranch's affable security guard, to build a small shelf for Maria's cookbooks. By late afternoon, inspired and fulfilled, Sarah decided to cook a special dinner. She prepared homemade pasta with fresh tomato sauce, tossed a green salad, and baked garlic bread. The aroma of herbs and simmering tomatoes filled the kitchen, so enticing that it stopped Carlos in his tracks as he passed by. "Madre mia, Miss Sarah," he said with a laugh. "You've turned this place into a 5-star restaurant." His teasing made Sarah blush. Maria rested a hand on her shoulder, her eyes moist with emotion. "You remind me of my mother," she said softly. "She used to say, 'The kitchen is the soul of the home,' and you, my dear, are bringing that soul back." Sarah smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. Once, she had dreamed of creating a home with Thomas. That dream had vanished. But here, even if temporary, she was building something new. "This isn't my home," she reminded herself, "but for the next 6 months, I can make it feel like one." At exactly 7 p.m., Jack Morrison entered the dining room with his usual frown and a stack of paperwork in hand. But this time, he hesitated at the doorway. His eyes slowly scanned the transformed kitchen, the soft curtains filtering in golden light, the table with its wildflower centerpiece, and the rich aroma of dinner still lingering in the air. He said nothing, just took his seat at the head of the table. But Sarah noticed. He looked around longer than usual. Maria and Carlos joined them for dinner, a rare and lively gathering. The table buzzed with conversation. Carlos cracked jokes about the horses. Maria shared nostalgic stories from her early days on the ranch. Sarah stayed mostly quiet, her heart quietly proud. The space she'd created was already working. It was bringing people together. Jack, however, remained distant, eating in silence. But now and then, Sarah caught his eyes drifting her way. After the others had cleared out, Jack stood and looked straight at her. "What did you do to the kitchen?" he asked. His tone wasn't angry, just cautious, laced with curiosity. "I didn't ask you to change anything." Sarah met his gaze, unflinching. "You told me to use my time however I wanted. I'm an interior designer, Jack. I can't live in a place that has no soul. That kitchen, it needed warmth. And honestly, I think we all did, including you." His brow furrowed, not in anger, but in thought. He clearly wasn't used to being challenged. "This is my house, Sarah, not your project." "Your house?" she countered, her tone steady but firm. "It feels more like an office. Maybe that works for you, but I can't live that way. If I'm going to be here, I need it to feel livable." She paused for a moment, sensing she may have gone too far, but she didn't take the words back. Jack stared at her, his expression unreadable, a mix of irritation and something else she couldn't quite place. After a long silence, he gave a small nod. "Do what you want. Just don't expect me to thank you." He turned and walked out. But just before disappearing through the doorway, Sarah noticed him glance back at the kitchen one more time. Later, as Sarah stood at the sink washing dishes, Maria joined her, grinning. "You rattled him," she said with a chuckle. "He's not used to people standing their ground. But I saw how he looked at you. It was different. You're doing great, Sarah. Don't stop now." Sarah nodded, hands still submerged in soapy water, but her heart felt lighter than it had in days. She wasn't just redesigning a kitchen. She was reclaiming herself. And whether Jack Morrison admitted it or not, she knew he was paying attention. A quiet part of her wondered, what would he do if she kept pushing back? That night, standing by her window and looking out over the moonlit ranch, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. It felt like she'd won a battle. Maybe not the war, but something had shifted. Wyoming, with all its wildness and unfamiliar ground, was slowly becoming a place where she could stand tall again. The next morning, sunlight poured over Morrison Ranch in a soft golden glow, touching everything with peace. In the kitchen, Sarah had recently transformed. Beige curtains fluttered gently, and a vase of wildflowers caught the light on the small dining table. A simple touch, but it warmed the room and reminded her that progress wasn't always loud. Standing by the living room window, tea in hand, she gazed out over the rolling fields. It was the lightest she'd felt since arriving in Wyoming. The scandal back in Dallas still haunted her. The memory of being left at the altar by Thomas Hartwell clung like a ghost. But here, she was slowly learning how to rise again. The peace, however, didn't last long. A low hum broke the morning stillness, the sound of a car approaching from the long dirt road. Sarah's brows knit in concern as a sleek black sedan rolled up to the iron gates. Carlos, the ranch's watchful guard, emerged from the stables, eyes narrowing. The gates creaked open, and then her heart froze. Stepping out of the car was none other than Thomas Hartwell. dressed sharply in a navy blue suit, his hair perfectly combed. He wore the same arrogant smirk she knew all too well. Beside him stood a middle-aged man in glasses, briefcase in hand, clearly a lawyer. But it wasn't the suit, or the surprise, or even the lawyer that unsettled her the most. It was the look in Thomas's eyes, not just aimed at her, but burning with something darker. Possession, hostility. As if he hadn't come just to see her, but to claim something far bigger. Sarah's grip tightened around the teacup, fighting the surge of emotion that rose in her chest. She had never expected Thomas to find her here, at the edge of Wyoming, where she thought she'd finally escaped him. The doorbell rang. Maria stepped out of the kitchen, her expression tense. "Miss Sarah, do you want me to call Mr. Jack?" she asked softly. Sarah straightened her spine. "No, Maria, I'll handle it." She set her cup down, took a slow, calming breath, and walked to the front door, ready to face whatever storm Thomas Hartwell had brought with him. She was no longer the fragile bride from Dallas. Wyoming had given her solid ground to stand on, and she wasn't about to let Thomas take that from her. At the gate, Thomas leaned against his car, his gaze sweeping over her like she was merely a pawn in a much larger game. "Sarah," he said smoothly, his voice dripping with mockery. "You ran off to become the wife of someone like Morrison? That's disappointing." Sarah stepped forward, her eyes steady. "What do you want, Thomas? I'm not part of your life anymore." The man beside him finally spoke, his voice flat and legal. "I'm Robert Clean, Mr. Hartwell's attorney. We're here to inform you that your marriage to Mr. Jack Morrison is invalid. You are still legally engaged to Mr. Hartwell under a contract that has not been formally dissolved. We request you cease this conduct, or legal action will follow." Sarah's face flushed with anger. "Invalid?" she snapped. "You left me at the altar in front of hundreds of people, Thomas, and you think you still have any legal claim over me?" Before Thomas could reply, a deep voice cut through the tension. "She doesn't belong to you, Hartwell, and neither does this land." Jack Morrison stepped out of the house, calm and composed, but his eyes gleamed with steel. He came to stand beside Sarah, tall and resolute. Sarah noticed something else in his gaze as he looked at Thomas, not just fury, but familiarity, history. Thomas smirked, a glint of triumph in his eyes. "Morrison, long time no see. Still clinging to this land. I thought you'd have learned your lesson after the last time we crossed paths." Sarah turned to Jack, surprise flickering across her face. They knew each other, but Jack didn't look at her. His eyes remained locked on Thomas. "The last time you tried to steal my Colorado project, Hartwell, you failed. This won't be any different." Sarah's heart raced. Colorado? A project? Jack had never mentioned that. Clearly, this went deeper than she'd realized. Thomas took a step closer, still wearing that smug smile. "This time is different. Sarah is my fiancée, and your fake marriage won't hide the fact that you're using her as a loophole to hold on to this property. Back down, or I'll take you both down." But Sarah wasn't afraid anymore. Her fear burned away, replaced by fire. She stepped directly in front of Thomas, her voice fierce. "I am not your fiancée anymore, Thomas. I am Jack Morrison's legal wife." She reached for Jack's hand and squeezed it, both, to make a statement and to remind herself who she was now. She wasn't the woman Thomas had once abandoned. "You have no claim here. Leave." Thomas froze, stunned by her defiance. Jack looked at her with something close to surprise and respect. He squeezed her hand back and then turned his gaze on Thomas. "Your lawyer might want to double-check the paperwork, Hartwell. Our marriage is certified and legal, and if you think you can use the same tricks you tried in Colorado, you're mistaken. I beat you once. I'll do it again." Clean took a cautious step back, murmuring about needing to review the documents. Thomas, trying to maintain his swagger, jabbed a finger toward Sarah. "You'll regret this, Sarah. And Morrison, don't forget, I never quit." With that, he turned and got into the car, followed by his lawyer. The black sedan disappeared down the dusty road, leaving nothing but silence and a faint trail of dust behind. Only then did Sarah realize she was still holding Jack's hand. She gently let go, her cheeks warming as she turned away to hide her embarrassment. "Thank you," she said quietly but firmly. "And, Colorado, what happened between you two?" Jack looked at her, his gaze softening. 3 years ago, the Hartwell family tried to undercut me in a massive real estate deal in Colorado. Thomas led the charge. Bribes, legal threats, dirty tactics. I beat him, but he never let it go. Now he's targeting this ranch, and you're just part of his leverage," Jack said quietly. Then, in a softer voice, he added, "But you handled that well, Sarah. I didn't expect you to stand up to him like that." Sarah gave a small, confident smile. "You don't know me very well yet, Jack, and if Thomas wants to play dirty, I'm not letting you fight him alone." With that, she turned and walked back into the house, leaving Jack standing there, watching her with a newfound curiosity. That evening in the living room, Maria and Carlos buzzed with excitement as they listened to the story. "You shut him down," Carlos laughed, slapping the table. Maria reached out and clasped Sarah's hands, her eyes gleaming. "You're stronger than you think, dear, and Mr. Jack saw it too." Sarah nodded, though her mind was spinning with everything she'd just learned. About Jack, about Thomas, and the buried feud that ran deeper than she'd realized. She looked out the window, the moonlight casting a silvery sheen across the ranch. This wasn't just about defending herself anymore. She was stepping into something bigger, and for the first time, she felt ready. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the Morrison Ranch was bathed in a golden-orange glow, painting the fields and forests in warmth tinged with unease. Sarah Mitchell stood at the window, staring toward the distant mountains. The confrontation with Thomas still echoed in her chest. Taking Jack's hand and declaring herself his wife had given her a surge of strength, but it left her wondering, who exactly was she in Jack Morrison's life? A pretend wife? A partner by contract? Or something beginning to push beyond those boundaries? Hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway. Carlos, the ranch's security guard, opened the door with urgency, his tanned face tight with concern. "Miss Sarah, can you get Mr. Jack? I found something by the west fence. Footprints. Someone's been lurking in the woods." Sarah's heart jumped. She nodded and rushed upstairs, knocking on the door of Jack's office. He opened it swiftly, and his expression hardened the moment she relayed Carlos's message. "Footprints, broken branches, tire marks," Carlos reported in a grim voice. "Not locals. Whoever it was knew how to avoid the cameras." Jack's jaw clenched, his arms crossing tightly. "Hartwell," he muttered, the name like frost on his lips. "He didn't stop after this morning. Now he's trying to sabotage the land. And he knows our marriage is the key to me keeping it." Sarah frowned, unease rippling through her. "Sabotage? What do you mean?" Jack turned to her, eyes sharp with cold calculation, and something fiercer, resolve. "This ranch has been in my family for generations, but there's an old clause in the will. It requires me to be married to retain ownership. Thomas and his family are challenging it, and they'll do anything to win, even physical sabotage." Without another word, Jack strode out of the office, gesturing for Sarah and Carlos to follow. "We're tightening security, and Sarah, you need to know how to defend yourself. If something happens, I need you ready." Fear climbed up Sarah's spine, but she nodded. She wasn't used to threats or violence, but she refused to be the weak link. At dusk, Jack led her to a quiet stretch behind the stables. A makeshift shooting range had been set up, targets arranged, a handgun resting on a wooden table beside a few boxes of ammunition. The setting sun cast a crimson hue across the landscape, illuminating Jack's sharp features and the tension he carried like armor. "Ever fired a gun before?" he asked, his tone calm but serious, not cold, just real. Sarah shook her head, her hands clasped tightly in front of her to hide the tremble. "Never," she admitted, "but I want to learn." Jack nodded and handed her the gun, his movements calm and deliberate. He began walking her through the basics, how to grip it firmly, how to align her stance, how to breathe. When she faltered, he stepped in close, his hand wrapping gently over hers to guide her into position. His touch was steady and warm, a quiet contrast to his usual cool demeanor. "Hold it steady, but don't lock your arms," he said softly, his breath brushing against her ear. The closeness made her cheeks flush, but she focused, locking her eyes on the wooden target a few dozen feet away. She fired. The bullet veered wide, so wide she muttered a curse under her breath. Jack chuckled, low and unexpected. It made her glance at him in surprise. "You'll get better," he said, his voice softer now. "But you have to believe in yourself. You're not weak, Sarah. I saw that this morning." Something in his words made her stand taller. She fired again, then again. The shots still missed, but they were closer. "I don't want to be a burden," she said, lowering the gun but keeping her gaze steady. "Teach me how to protect this place. I'm here, Jack. I'll do my part." He looked at her for a long moment, as though seeing her in a new light. "All right," he said quietly, but with conviction. "You'll learn, and I'll make sure you're safe." That night, the air around Morrison Ranch grew heavier with tension. Jack, Carlos, and Sarah took turns patrolling the grounds, radios crackling and flashlights slicing through the dark. The pine forest, once peaceful, now felt sinister. Every snapped twig sent a jolt of fear through Sarah's chest. She walked beside Jack, the weight of the holstered handgun at her side grounding her even as her heart raced. They paused at the west fence line, where Carlos had earlier found the tracks. Jack crouched beneath the beam of the flashlight, scanning the dirt. "They were here last night," he murmured, pointing to a faint tire impression. "They're scouting, testing our defenses." Sarah's nerves tightened. "Do you really think it's Thomas?" Jack stood, his jaw clenched, his voice steely. "I don't think. I know. He's trying to destroy everything I've built, and he knows you're the reason he can't. But I won't let him touch you, Sarah." The fierceness in his words caught her off guard. Unexpected. Protective. It stirred something inside her, something deep and unspoken. She looked at him longer than she intended. In the quiet darkness of the forest, a fragile trust began to form between them. They continued walking, side by side, flashlight beams dancing between the trees. Suddenly, a rustle burst from the nearby brush. Sarah instinctively raised her gun, her hands trembling but her eyes focused. Jack reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, firm but gentle. "Easy," he whispered. "Just a deer." She exhaled, lowering the weapon slowly. His hand lingered just a moment longer, steadying her, grounding her. She wasn't alone. By the time they returned to the house, it was late. Jack stopped at the door and turned to her. "You did good tonight," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "You didn't have to prove anything, but you did. Get some rest. We'll keep going tomorrow." Sarah nodded, offering a faint but genuine smile. "Thank you, Jack, for believing in me." She stepped inside, the house, heart lighter than it had been in days. It felt like she'd crossed some invisible threshold, not just into the ranch's defenses, but into something more personal. She wasn't just learning how to defend the land, she was learning how to defend herself. Upstairs in his office, Jack sat alone, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. His eyes were still on the door Sarah had walked through. The image of her, gun in hand, shaky but determined, refused to leave his mind. She wasn't just part of a bargain anymore. She was someone he wanted to protect, and that realization terrified him more than he'd ever admit. Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Heartwarming Millionaire, we invite you home, where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. Rain poured over the Morrison ranch like a heavy curtain, swallowing the moonlight and turning the grassy fields into a sea of shadow. Thunder rolled overhead as wind whipped through the pine trees, deepening the sense of unease that had settled over the land. Sarah Mitchell stood in the living room, her eyes locked on the window, where raindrops pelted the glass in rhythmic fury. Ever since the confrontation with Thomas Hartwell and the eerie signs in the woods, Jack Morrison had acted swiftly. He'd hired a professional security team, 7 trained men armed with radios and rifles, now patrolling the perimeter day and night. Carlos, the longtime guard, remained in charge, but the new presence served as both a comfort and a grim signal. Jack wasn't just protecting the ranch, he was preparing for war. In the kitchen, Maria quietly busied herself with making coffee, trying to preserve a shred of normalcy. "Miss Sarah, you should get some rest," she urged, concern lacing her voice. "Jack's new security team is top-notch. No one's getting through them." But Sarah shook her head, her fingers brushing the holstered handgun at her waist. Since the shooting lesson with Jack, she hadn't gone anywhere without it, not out of confidence, but out of a growing resolve. She refused to be anyone's burden. Jack entered the living room, rain dripping from his jacket, his expression as sharp as ever. "Sarah, stay inside tonight," he said firmly. "Carlos and the team are out there. If anything happens, I'll handle it." She frowned, bristling at his tone. "I've learned to shoot, Jack." "I can help," she said, stepping toward him, her gaze unwavering. "I don't want to just watch. This is my home, too." He stared at her for a moment, something like surprise flickering in his eyes, before it disappeared behind his usual mask. "Stay with Maria. That's an order." He turned away, but she caught the tension in his shoulders. He wasn't just protecting the ranch. He was protecting her. As night deepened, the rain intensified. Sarah and Maria sat together in the dimly lit living room. The beige curtain Sarah had hung earlier swayed in the breeze, casting long shadows. Then came the sound, loud, sharp, a bang near the front gate, followed by frantic shouts over Carlos's radio. "Intruders, west side." They cut the fence. Sarah shot to her feet, heart thundering. Maria grabbed her arm, eyes wide with fear. "Miss Sarah, please, stay here." But Sarah pulled away, drawing her gun with shaking hands. "I have to help. Lock the door and call the police." Without waiting for a response, she ran out the back door into the storm. Rain lashed against her face, blurring her vision. But through the downpour, she saw them. Carlos and 2 guards locked in a brutal struggle with masked intruders dressed in black. Jack's men were skilled, but they were outnumbered. At least 6 attackers, all armed. Sarah ducked behind a tree, forcing herself to breathe. From the direction of the stables, Jack's voice rang out, strong and commanding. "Carlos, hold the left side. Don't let them get near the house." But then she saw it. One of the intruders breaking past the others, moving silently toward Jack, a knife gleaming in a burst of lightning. Jack, focused on another attacker, didn't see him. Sarah didn't think. She just acted. Raising her gun, Hands trembling, she aimed at the man's leg. Exhaling sharply, she squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the storm. The man collapsed with a cry of pain, clutching his bleeding thigh. Jack spun around, his eyes locking on Sarah in stunned disbelief. "Sarah!" he shouted, racing toward her. But before he could reach her, another attacker opened fire. Jack lunged, tackling her to the ground, shielding her as bullets tore through the night air. The assault was swift and chaotic. Though initially overwhelmed, Jack's security team quickly regained control, managing to subdue 3 of the intruders. The others fled into the surrounding woods, abandoning the wounded man Sarah had shot. Moments later, police arrived, alerted by Maria, and took the injured attacker into custody, collecting statements from the shaken but unharmed residents. As the danger ebbed and rain continued to fall, a heavy silence settled over the ranch, broken only by the ragged breaths of those who had fought. Jack pulled Sarah inside, his coat drenched, water dripping from his hair onto his forehead. He grasped her shoulders, eyes blazing with an emotion she had never seen in him before. "You saved my life, Sarah," he murmured, his voice low and gentle. For the first time, he didn't call her Miss Mitchell. "But don't ever put yourself in danger like that again. I can't lose you." Still trembling with adrenaline, Sarah met his gaze. "I couldn't just stand by, Jack. This isn't just your home anymore. I'm trying to belong here too." Her words filled the space between them with an aching stillness. Jack's expression softened, the guarded walls around him visibly cracking. Without speaking, he pulled her into a tight embrace. Warmth seeped through their rain-soaked clothes as Sarah froze for a moment, then melted into him. She could feel his heart pounding wildly, as if he'd just faced his greatest fear, losing her. In that moment, amidst the storm and the aftermath, they quietly crossed a line they had both tiptoed around, the boundaries of their agreement now blurred by something deeper. When they finally pulled apart, Jack didn't release her hand. His gaze held hers firmly. "You're more than a contract to me," he said, his voice hoarse with sincerity. "Thank you, Sarah." She smiled, a quiet glow rising in her chest like a puzzle piece finally snapping into place. In the kitchen, Maria and Carlos waited, equal parts worried and proud. "Miss Sarah, you're a warrior." Carlos beamed, clapping. Maria pulled her into a hug, whispering, "I knew you were special, and now Mr. Jack knows too." Sarah blushed but didn't deny it. Her eyes drifted toward Jack, who stood in the doorway watching her. His expression had changed, softened, protective, and she felt seen in a way that made her heart swell. That night, back in her room, Sarah stood at the window, watching the rain fade into a gentle mist. She hadn't just survived the night. She had fought back and won. The Morrison Ranch, once merely a place of shelter, now felt like something more. It felt like home. And Jack Morrison, the cold, aloof man she once saw as just a business partner, was slowly becoming something far more dangerous and far more precious to her heart. The next morning, a hush blanketed the ranch, heavy with meaning. The storm had passed, leaving the grassy fields shimmering beneath the soft light of dawn. Sarah Mitchell stirred in her bed, the memories of the previous night still vivid. Gunfire, rain, and Jack's unexpected embrace lingering like a heartbeat in her chest. As she stepped into the hallway, she felt it immediately. Something had shifted. The air inside the house was lighter, as if the violence had swept away an invisible wall that had long stood between them. In the kitchen, the scent of coffee and toast floated in the air. But it wasn't the smell that stopped Sarah. It was the sight before her, not Maria at the counter, but Jack. He stood there pouring coffee into 2 mugs, wearing a light blue button-down with his sleeves rolled up, looking more at ease than she had ever seen him. When he saw her, he didn't speak right away. He simply slid a mug toward her, and in his eyes was a tenderness she didn't recognize, but would come to cherish. "Good morning," he said, his voice low and calm. "I figured you deserved to be served for once, after everything last night." Sarah accepted the mug, the warmth seeping into her palms. "Thank you," she replied, slightly flustered by his sudden tenderness. "You didn't have to do that, Jack." A faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "I wanted to." He paused, his eyes drifting toward the window. "I'd like to take you for a walk. Just us. There's a trail behind the ranch. It's beautiful this time of day." The invitation caught her off guard. Sarah looked up, meeting his gaze. She nodded, sensing this wasn't just a walk. It was something more, a step forward. The trail wound through tall pine trees, golden shafts of sunlight breaking through the canopy and dancing across the forest floor. Sarah walked beside Jack, wrapped in a light jacket, her hair loosely tied. For the first time in years, she felt completely free. Jack remained quiet as they walked, but the silence wasn't awkward. It was thoughtful, like the calm between heartbeats before something important is said. At last, Jack broke the silence. "I never properly thanked you," he said, his voice husky. "Last night, you didn't just save my life. You protected this place. I didn't think you had that kind of strength in you, Sarah." Sarah smiled faintly, her eyes on the distant mountains. "I didn't think I had it in me either, but I couldn't just stand by, not here, not with you." She paused, surprised at her own honesty. Jack stopped walking and turned to face her. His gaze was intense, searching. "I never told you about my father," he said quietly. "He died when I was 20. He built this ranch with his bare hands, not just the land, but what it stood for. After he passed, I was betrayed. A close friend, someone I trusted like a brother, tried to take my real estate company from me. He teamed up with the Hartwells. Yes, those Hartwells. They nearly pushed me out. I fought back and won. But after that, I stopped trusting people." Sarah listened in silence, her heart heavy with this new understanding. That Thomas's family, the Hartwells, had betrayed Jack too, added a painful symmetry to their pasts. "That's why you keep people at arm's length," she said softly. "Why you needed the contract in the first place." Jack nodded slowly. His eyes flickered to hers. "I thought the contract would keep things simple. No feelings, no risks. But you—" He hesitated, as if the words stuck in his throat. "You weren't what I expected." Sarah smiled gently, her heart fluttering. She inhaled, then took the leap. "My mother always wanted me to marry someone rich, someone like Thomas. She said it was the only way I'd ever succeed. I tried to make her proud. I tried to believe in that life. But every time I looked at Thomas, I knew I didn't love him. I loved the idea of a family, a home, but not with him. When he left me at the altar, I thought I had failed her, failed everything I was supposed to want. But being here," her voice trembled slightly, "I've realized I don't need her approval. Or his. I know who I am now." Jack's gaze softened in the golden afternoon light. "You didn't fail, Sarah. You're stronger than anyone I've ever met." He stepped closer, the space between them growing smaller. "I need to ask you something. If there were no contract, would you stay with me?" The question hit her like a wave. She met his eyes, recognizing a rare vulnerability he didn't try to hide. "I don't know," she answered honestly, her voice soft but steady. "But I do know I don't want to leave, not because of a contract, but because I want to find out what this could become, between us." A real smile, one she had never seen before, spread across Jack's face. He reached out and gently touched her cheek. Then let's find out, he said warmly. No contracts, no terms, just you and me. They returned to the ranch as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky painted in hues of gold and rose. The kitchen welcomed them with soft, ambient light and the gentle clinking of dishes in the background. Maria glanced up from the counter, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "You two look different," she said with a knowing smile. "Keep it up, Miss Sarah. Mr. Jack needs someone like you." Sarah blushed but didn't argue. She glanced at Jack standing quietly in the doorway, catching his gaze still fixed on her, tender, vulnerable, and completely unguarded. In that quiet exchange, something shifted in her chest. The Morrison Ranch, once just a refuge from her shattered past, was beginning to feel like something more. And Jack Morrison, once just a name on a legal contract, was slowly becoming the home her heart had been searching for all along. That evening, the Morrison Ranch's greenhouse glowed under a canopy of golden string lights. Wildflowers and green vines curled around wooden beams and misted windows, transforming the once sterile space into something warm, alive, and magical. Sarah Mitchell stood at its center, clutching an old engagement ring, Thomas Hartwell's ring, a symbol of Dallas and the life she'd left behind, a relic from a world that no longer held power over her. Tonight's dinner, arranged by Jack, was intimate, just the two of them, and Maria and Carlos. The table was rustic but filled with heart, homemade bread, grilled meats, red wine. But Sarah knew this wasn't about the food. It was about letting go. She walked to the small fireplace nestled in the corner of the greenhouse. The ring sparkled one last time in the firelight. "I've held on to this for too long," she said quietly, her voice steady and clear. "It doesn't belong to me anymore." And with that, she tossed the ring into the flames. The fire curled around the metal, consuming it, erasing what it once represented: heartbreak, expectation, and the weight of someone else's dreams. Maria clapped with delight, eyes glistening. Carlos let out a celebratory whistle. Jack stood, wineglass in hand, eyes locked on Sarah. "I have something to say," he began, his voice firm and steady. "Our contract ends tonight. I don't want it anymore." He set the glass down and stepped closer. "Sarah, you've changed this place, and you've changed me. I want something real, no terms, no clauses, just us. Will you start over with me?" Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She met his gaze, and for the first time, there was no trace of the guarded man who once offered her marriage as a business deal. "I want that too," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Not because of a contract, but because of you." Jack smiled softly, lifted her chin, and under the glowing canopy of the greenhouse, they kissed for the first time, tender, deep, and full of all the unspoken truths they had long kept hidden. Maria and Carlos burst into joyful applause, their laughter breaking the intensity of the moment. As they pulled apart, Sarah felt a weight lift off her shoulders. Every burden she'd carried from Dallas, every fear, every doubt, was gone. Jack took her hand, his eyes shining. "Welcome to a new life, Sarah." She smiled, knowing this wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of everything she had never thought she could have. Early autumn sunlight bathed the Morrison Ranch in golden hues, glistening off the windows of the glass greenhouse and stretching across the vast open fields. The Wyoming air was crisp, tinged with the scent of fresh-cut timber from a new cabin rising on the edge of the property. Sarah Mitchell stood by the living room window, her hand gently resting on her stomach, a quiet, reverent awe blooming inside her. Just days ago, she had discovered she was pregnant. The news was unexpected, but instead of fear, it brought a peace she couldn't quite explain. Since that kiss in the greenhouse, Since the contract between her and Jack had become a distant memory, they had stepped into something completely real, something built on trust, not obligation. And now, this child, this life, was proof that new beginnings were possible, not just for the ranch, but for her, for them. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her thoughts before telling Jack. She wasn't afraid of how he'd react, just overwhelmed by how quickly life had transformed. From an abandoned bride to a woman rooted in this land, a part of Jack. And now, soon to be a mother. She stepped outside and made her way toward the construction site, where a wooden cabin was gradually taking shape. Jack had started building it just days ago, calling it a gift for you, built your way. He was there now, sleeves rolled up, sweat glistening on his brow, hammer in hand. Though the professional security team still patrolled the grounds following the recent attack, today Jack seemed intent on creating something with his own hands, as if every nail and beam carried a piece of his devotion. "Jack," she called, her voice slightly unsteady. He looked up, dropped the hammer, and smiled the moment he saw her. "Is everything okay?" he asked, wiping his hands as he walked toward her. Sarah nodded, swallowed the lump in her throat, and spoke clearly, though softly. "I'm pregnant, Jack. We're having a baby." For a moment, Jack stood frozen, eyes wide with disbelief. Then, a slow, radiant smile spread across his face, unlike any she had seen before. He pulled her into a firm, loving embrace, his arms wrapping around her as if to shield her from the world. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "you just made me the happiest man alive." He gently stepped back and placed his hand over her belly, eyes glistening. "We'll do this together. I promise." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. "I'm scared, Jack, but I'm so happy. I want this baby to grow up with a real family." "You both will have that," Jack replied, his grip tightening around her hand. "I swear it." As the cabin continued to take shape, crafted by Jack's hands and guided by Sarah's sketches, so did the life they were building. She had designed the space with tall windows to catch the morning light, a warm hearth, and open areas meant for laughter and love. Jack often teased her about her detailed plans, especially the built-in bookcase she insisted on. "Trying to turn this into a library already?" he joked one afternoon, hammering nails into the frame. Sarah laughed, tossing a scrap of wood his way. "This baby's going to grow up with stories, Jack. I want this house to be magical." He caught the piece and smiled, eyes softening. "It already is, because you're in it." As the walls of the cabin rose, Sarah discovered a new purpose. She launched an online interior design class for women across rural Wyoming, hoping to empower them to turn modest homes into warm, personalized sanctuaries, just as she had done with the ranch kitchen. Her first class was held in the cozy living room, her laptop perched on the wooden table, sunlight pouring through the beige curtains she'd once hung. More than a dozen women joined, single moms, curious teens, and homemakers looking for inspiration. Sarah spoke with calm confidence, sharing tips on color, space, and how to breathe life into worn-out rooms. "A home doesn't need to be expensive," she told them. "It just needs your heart." When one participant thanked her for giving them hope, Sarah smiled with quiet pride. In teaching others, she was healing herself. From the doorway, Jack watched silently. When the session ended, he stepped forward and placed a warm cup of tea beside her. "You were incredible," he said, pride shining in his eyes. "Those women are lucky to have you." Each evening, Sarah and Jack sat by the fire, dreaming aloud about the baby's future in the home they were building. Jack had become a devoted father-to-be, devouring parenting books, asking questions, and even crafting a wooden cradle by hand. To Sarah, he was no longer the distant man who once offered her a cold, contractual marriage. He was the partner she'd always hoped for, and now the father of her child. He was her partner, her husband, and now the father of her child. One night, under a full moon streaming through their bedroom window, Sarah felt the first flutter within her belly. She gasped softly, placing her hand over her stomach, her eyes wide with wonder. Jack was at her side in an instant. "Was that?" he asked, breathless. She nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "Jack, we're going to be a family." He reached for her hand and kissed it gently. "Sarah, we already are." In the cold, sterile light of the courthouse in the small Wyoming town, polished wooden benches reflected the weight of justice. Sarah Mitchell sat in the front row, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her gaze was steady, but inside, tension churned. Across the room stood Thomas Hartwell, her former fiancé, behind the defendant's podium. His tailored suit and manicured appearance couldn't mask the flicker of unease in his eyes. Today, he was facing serious charges: money laundering, property sabotage, and threats to life. Beside Sarah sat Jack Morrison, calm but watchful, his sharp gaze locked onto Thomas like a predator who had patiently waited for this moment. The trial had been ignited by Thomas's attempts to discredit their marriage, planting rumors in the press that Sarah had married Jack only for financial gain, hoping to nullify Jack's claim over the Morrison ranch. But Jack, ever the calculating CEO, had anticipated this play. After the attack during the stormy night, he'd quietly hired a private investigation team to dig deep into Hartwell's dealings. Now, the truth was ready to surface. Jack's lead attorney, a poised and commanding woman, rose and addressed the court. "Your Honor," she began, voice clear and unwavering, "we present evidence that the defendant, Mr. Thomas Hartwell, conspired with criminal elements to sabotage Morrison Ranch in an unlawful attempt to seize ownership. Furthermore, his financial records show a trail of offshore transactions, strongly indicative of money laundering." She laid out the damning evidence: forged contracts, audio recordings of Thomas speaking with hired criminals, and high-resolution security footage obtained by Jack's private guards. With every piece introduced, Thomas's trademark smirk began to fade. "And," she continued, her tone sharp, "we have direct evidence connecting Mr. Hartwell to the October 15th attack on Morrison Ranch, an incident during which the lives of Miss Sarah Mitchell and Mr. Jack Morrison were in danger." Sarah felt her heart clench at the mention of her name, but kept her posture strong and her gaze unflinching. She would not give Thomas the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. The judge nodded solemnly. After a moment of silence, he issued a formal detention order, remanding Thomas Hartwell into custody pending further investigation. As officers approached to escort him out, Thomas turned toward Sarah, fury blazing in his eyes. "You think you've won, Sarah," he spat. "You're just a pawn in Morrison's game." Sarah rose slowly and walked toward him, her voice calm and cutting. "I've forgiven myself, Thomas," she said, her words slicing through the heavy silence. "You no longer matter. You didn't lose because of Jack. You lost because of your own greed." For the first time, Thomas looked stunned, speechless. Sarah turned away without another glance and took Jack's hand. His presence grounded her, steady and sure. He squeezed her hand, pride shining in his eyes. "You were amazing," he whispered as they exited the courtroom. "He'll never hurt us again." Sarah gave a soft, relieved smile. A final weight had lifted from her shoulders. That evening, under the soft glow of the moonlight, the Morrison Ranch stood peaceful and still. In the heart of the cozy living room she had redesigned with her own hands, Sarah curled up beside the man who had become her home. Beige curtains, vases of wildflowers, and soft lighting transformed the room into a haven of warmth and comfort. Maria arrived with a tray of tea, and Carlos did his best to lighten the mood with his usual humor. But Sarah didn't need distraction. Just looking at Jack, seated beside her, brought her peace. He stood and gently took her hand, leading her onto the porch. Under the moonlight, he pulled her close, his voice low and steady. "I've been preparing for this day for a long time, Sarah. I knew Hartwell wouldn't stop after Colorado, but I never imagined it would be you who would take him down. You didn't just protect the ranch, you protected us." Sarah looked up at him, her heart swelling. "I didn't do it alone, Jack. You gave me a place to start over, to become stronger. This isn't just your home anymore. It's ours." Jack smiled, wrapping her in a warm embrace. "And it'll be our child's home, too," he whispered, resting his hand gently on her growing belly. Sarah leaned into him, the night breeze brushing across the fields, washing away the last of her fears. Thomas Hartwell and all the ghosts of her past were fading into memory. Morrison Ranch, its battles, its beauty, was now her forever home. The greenhouse at Morrison Ranch shimmered in the golden light of sunset. Strings of fairy lights twinkled like stars above, mingling with the delicate scent of wildflowers and climbing vines. Sarah Mitchell stood in front of a makeshift mirror, wearing a simple white silk gown, nothing flashy like the one she'd worn in Dallas, but full of grace. The kind of grace that came from a woman who had rediscovered her strength. Today, she wasn't a runaway bride. She was a woman who had faced herself and won. She was stepping into a future she had chosen, hand in hand with Jack Morrison. The ranch, once quiet and cold, now pulsed with life, shaped in part by her vision. From the cozy kitchen to the nearly finished wooden cottage, where their baby would one day take their first steps, everything carried her touch. Maria, ever kind and maternal, adjusted Sarah's sheer veil, her eyes shining. "You look like an angel, Sarah," she whispered with emotion. "Jack's going to faint when he sees you." Sarah laughed softly, squeezing Maria's hand. "Thank you, Maria. You're family to me now." Just as Maria stepped out, a soft knock came at the door. Sarah turned and froze. Standing in the doorway were her parents. Her mother, Eleanor, wore a pale blue dress and looked smaller, more fragile than Sarah remembered. "Sarah," she said, voice trembling. "I'm sorry. I pushed you too hard. I only ever wanted you to be happy." Behind her, Robert stood quietly, nodding, remorse shadowing his features. Sarah took a breath, remembering the pressure they'd once put on her to marry someone like Thomas Hartwell. But now all she saw was a mother's outstretched heart. "Mom, Dad." She walked toward them and wrapped them both in an embrace. "I am happy. Thank you for coming." The moment was brief, but it was enough. Wounds long buried began to heal, and with that closure, Sarah was ready to walk into her wedding with a heart unburdened. Outside the greenhouse, the wedding setting was simple yet intimate. Wooden chairs draped in white linen, a petal-strewn aisle leading to the altar, and a circle of people who truly mattered. Maria and Carlos, Jack's security team, a few close friends from Sarah's design class, and now, her parents. Carlos, dressed in a neat black suit, stood grinning at the altar. "This is my first time officiating a wedding," he called out, earning a round of laughter that eased everyone's nerves. Jack stood at the altar in a deep gray suit, his eyes lighting up the moment he saw Sarah enter, her hand gently tucked in her father's. He was no longer the cold man who once proposed a marriage contract. He now radiated warmth and unwavering devotion. As her father guided her forward, Sarah felt the full weight of Jack's gaze, steady, tender, as though she were his entire world. The ceremony began to the soft strum of a local guitarist. Carlos, cheerful but respectful, stepped forward to officiate. Today, we witnessed the love of Jack Morrison and Sarah Mitchell, he began. A love that outgrew contracts, endured trials, and overcame the past. Laughter rippled gently through the crowd. Sarah glanced at Jack, who gave her a small, reassuring wink. She spoke her vows first, her voice clear and strong. Jack, when I came here, I was just trying to escape, but you gave me something I never expected. A place to rise, to become who I truly am. I promise to give my heart fully, to build this family with you. She rested her hand on her belly, her eyes glistening with tears. Jack never looked away. Holding her hand tightly, he spoke, his voice deep and certain. Sarah, I once believed all I needed was a legal wife to keep this ranch. But you're not just my wife. You're the reason I want to come home every day. You brought light into my life. I vow to protect you, love you, and build a home for our child, together. A hush fell over the gathering, thick with emotion. Even Eleanor discreetly wiped her eyes, her face glowing with pride. Carlos beamed. I now pronounce you husband and wife. When Jack kissed Sarah, the greenhouse erupted in applause. The kiss was deep and certain, no longer bound by contracts, no longer overshadowed by fear. It was real, passionate, free. Maria embraced Sarah, tears shining in her eyes, while Carlos clapped Jack on the back with a laugh. You did it, amigo. After the ceremony, guests gathered around a long wooden table under strings of lights, enjoying grilled meats, homemade bread, and glasses of wine. Eleanor pulled Sarah aside, her voice quiet but heartfelt. I was wrong to pressure you, but you chose right, Sarah. Sarah smiled and hugged her. Thank you for seeing that now. As the sun dipped behind the Wyoming hills, Jack and Sarah stood side by side on the greenhouse porch, bathed in the orange glow of twilight. Jack wrapped his arm around her, resting his hand on her belly. You've changed everything, Sarah, he whispered. I have you. I have our child. This is the family I never dreamed I'd be lucky enough to have. Sarah leaned into him, feeling the soft flutter of their baby beneath her skin. We built a home, Jack, she said, and I'll be here, every day, with you. Together, they stood shoulder to shoulder, facing a future filled with love, peace, and the promise of all that was still to come.